When you look at your logging and alerting today, you might see a familiar pattern. Plenty of data and plenty of alerts, but not nearly enough clear decisions. Your security information and event management, or SIEM platform, is generating a constant stream of messages, yet your analysts still spend much of their time closing noise and chasing dead ends. This narration, developed from my Tuesday Insights feature in Bare Metal Cyber magazine and developed by Bare Metal Cyber, is about changing that pattern by designing better SIEM use cases that turn raw events into meaningful signals your team can actually act on. A SIEM use case is simply a specific situation you care about, written down as logic inside the platform. It might describe a risky pattern of logons, a suspicious change to a critical system, or signs that data is leaving in a way it should not. Each use case encodes what you are looking for, why it matters, and what should happen when the pattern appears. It sits at the intersection of technology, process, and people. Technically, it lives as rules, analytics, and playbook triggers. But practically, it shapes how your analysts and your Security Operations Center, SOC, spend their time. You can think of each use case as a small contract between your environment and your SOC. On one side is the scenario or risk you care about: abuse of a privileged account, an attacker landing on a sensitive server, or a contractor reaching data they should not see. On the other side are the practical details: which log sources and fields you need, how events will be tied together, what priority the alert should carry, and what response you expect when it fires. Good use cases also include some idea of how you will know they are working, such as how often they fire and how often they lead to real investigations. A common trap is to treat vendor content packs and default correlation rules as the use cases themselves. Those shipped rules can be useful starting points, but they are not finished use cases until they are mapped to your own systems, identities, and business processes. A generic rule for multiple failed logons does not help much by itself. A tailored use case for unusual failed logons against high-value admin accounts from new locations during off hours with a clear triage path is a very different thing. Effective use cases are specific to your environment and threat model, and they are meant to evolve as your systems and attackers change. Designing a SIEM use case starts with a concrete scenario, not with a query language. You begin by naming a risk that already worries you, such as someone misusing a domain admin account or malicious code running on a payroll server. From there, you list the kinds of signals that would show up if that scenario were unfolding: logons, process starts, endpoint alerts, firewall connections, cloud audit events, or changes in group membership. This simple exercise forces you to connect real-world risk to the telemetry your SIEM can actually see. The next step is to translate that scenario into logic inside the SIEM. Events from different sources are normalized so that they share common fields like user, host, IP address, and action. You then encode relationships, thresholds, and time windows. For example, you might look for several failed logons followed by a successful one from a new country targeting an admin account, all within 10 minutes. You enrich that pattern with asset tags, user roles, and even threat intelligence, so that when the rule fires, the alert includes enough context for an analyst to understand why this matters and what to check first.
When the pattern is detected, the SIEM generates an alert that should read like the first paragraph of a story: who was involved, what happened, on which system, and why this use case decided it was worth attention. In many teams, this alert also kicks off an automation playbook that pulls recent activity for the user or host, checks for related alerts, and gathers key screenshots or logs. The final part of the loop is feedback. Analysts mark alerts as useful or noisy, and the use case is tuned based on what they learn. All of this assumes some basic foundations: reliable time synchronization, decent log coverage, and at least basic asset and identity data. When those assumptions are weak, even the best designed use case will stumble.
In daily operations, Most teams lean on a small set of SIEM use cases, far more than the rest. These workhorse detections cover suspicious authentication behavior, unusual admin activity, malware or exploit detections on high-value systems, and changes to critical configurations. They are often the first alerts that analysts check at the start of a shift because they line up with incidents the team has actually handled in the past. These use cases tend to be well documented, regularly reviewed, and directly connected to clear response steps. A practical starting point for many organizations is to aim for one or two quick win use cases rather than a huge library. You might focus on suspicious logons to cloud admin portals by combining identity provider (IDP) events, multi-factor authentication (MFA) prompts, and geolocation anomalies into a single tuned detection. Another quick win is to connect endpoint protection alerts to your most critical business systems so that anything touching those assets automatically ranks higher in the queue. These wins are achievable, even with a small team, and they give a visible improvement in the quality of your alerts. Over time, you can add deeper and more strategic use cases that reach across multiple domains. These might look for gradual privilege creep over months, risky third-party access paths into production, or patterns of data leaving sensitive repositories. To make those work, you usually need more complete logging, better asset and data classification, and sometimes integration with ticketing or identity governance systems. They take longer to design and tune, but once in place, they capture your understanding of how attackers move through your environment and where your business is most exposed. When SIEM use cases are designed well, they change how your SOC feels from the inside. Analysts see fewer, clearer alerts that connect directly to real risks instead of generic errors. Instead of starting their day buried in a long queue of similar items, they begin with a manageable set of signals tied to privileged accounts, crown jewel systems, and the access paths you already know are heavily targeted. In this mode, the SIEM becomes less of a generic log bucket and more of a decision support system for your defenders. Another benefit of strong use cases is the amount of context they embed. A good alert does not just say failed logons exceeded a threshold. It tells you that an important account behaved differently than usual, from a location no one expects, touching a system that matters to your business, and it suggests the first checks to perform. That context reduces the time it takes to triage and makes it easier for newer analysts to contribute. Over time, your portfolio of use cases becomes a living map of how your organization thinks about threats and risk, and it becomes easier to explain to leaders exactly what you are watching for and why. These gains come with real trade-offs. Building and maintaining good SIEM use cases takes time, data, and skill. You need logs from the right places, reasonably clean identity and asset information, and people who can translate between a human description of a threat and the logic that captures it. The platform itself has costs too, from data ingestion and storage to the compute needed for scheduled searches and analytics. In effect, you're choosing to shift effort away from purely ad hoc investigations and toward deliberate design and tuning work at the front of the process.
There are also clear red flags that your current SIEM use cases are not doing their job. One is an alert queue dominated by very generic rules, such as simple thresholds on failed logons that rarely lead to meaningful investigations. Another is heavy reliance on default vendor content with minimal tuning for your network, your applications, and your users. If analysts regularly close certain alerts as known noise or keep side lists of rules they try to ignore, that is the system telling you that the use case portfolio needs attention.
Shallow adoption tends to show up as a long list of rules that no one can really explain. Descriptions in the SIEM are vague, ownership is unclear, and there is no agreed playbook for what to do when an alert fires. Metrics focus on how many alerts you generated or closed, rather than whether they helped you catch incidents earlier or fix underlying weaknesses. In this situation, adding more rules often makes things worse because it increases the noise without improving the underlying design or feedback loop.
Healthy SIM use cases, in contrast, are visible both in metrics and in daily behavior. Alert volume is manageable, and a meaningful share of those alerts leads either to real investigations or to specific improvements in controls. Analysts can describe the purpose of the top use cases in plain language and know which pieces of evidence to pull first when one fires. There is a regular review rhythm where rules are retired, merged, or tightened based on experience, and changes are tracked and owned, just like other important configurations in your environment.
You can often spot these healthy signals in simple ways. When you ask someone on the team about a high-priority alert, they can tell you the scenario it maps to, not just the pattern it looks for. When you look back at recent incidents, you can point to specific use cases that helped you catch issues sooner, or at least made investigations smoother. Over time, you see fewer false positives for your most important detections, and faster handling of the kinds of incidents that matter most to your organization. At its heart, building effective SIM use cases is about turning fuzzy concerns about risk into concrete patterns, alerts, and response steps that your team can execute consistently. Instead of treating the platform as a passive log warehouse, you frame it as a set of questions you want answered and signals you want highlighted based on how attackers behave and how your business actually runs. That shift from generic rules to intentional, well-designed use cases is what allows you to move from noise to signal. The work does not have to be overwhelming. For most teams, it starts with a handful of well-chosen scenarios grounded in real assets, identities, and incidents. From there, you grow a portfolio of SIM use cases that sits at the center of detection and response, supported by clear ownership and regular feedback. As you listen to your own alert queue this week, notice whether it reflects the risks you truly care about. If it does not, that is your cue to start reshaping your SIM around use cases that do.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.